Broken Promises, The Fight for Workers' Rights in America, A Story of Resilience, Resistance, and the Battle for Justice. Table of Contents. Prologue, The Spark. Chapter 1, The Fall of Elias Vargas. Chapter 2, Exposing the System. Chapter 3, Corporate Greed Unmasked. Chapter 4, Vocational Trapdoors. Chapter 5, Silent Wounds. Chapter 6, Profits Over People. Chapter 7, The Elite's Playbook. Chapter 8, Grassroots Resistance. Chapter 9, Workers in the Age of AI and Climate Crisis. Chapter 10, A Call for Federal Standards. Chapter 11, The Long Road Ahead. Epilogue, A Call to Action. Prologue, The Spark set the stage for Eliot's life-changing injury and introduced the movement's beginning. Chapter 1, The Fall of Elias Vargas. Explore Eliot's injury, his fight for compensation, and the realization of systemic flaws. Chapter 2, Exposing the System. Kate Donovan investigates, uncovering shocking truths about workers' compensation inequities. Chapter 3, Corporate Greed Unmasked. Dive into the role of private equity and insurance companies exploiting injured workers. Chapter 4, Vocational Trapdoors. Unveiled the fraud in vocational rehabilitation services and how it traps workers. Chapter 5, Silent Wounds. Focus on the mental health toll on injured workers and the lack of systemic support. Chapter 6, Profits Over People. Expose corporate prioritization of profits at the expense of workers' rights. Chapter 7, The Elite's Playbook. Uncover the collaboration between corporate interests and political elites. Chapter 8, Grassroots Resistance. Highlight the movement's organizing efforts and growing national support. Chapter 9, Workers in the Age of AI and Climate Crisis. Explore the challenges of automation and climate change for workers. Chapter 10, A Call for Federal Standards. Take the fight to Washington, demanding systemic reform. Chapter 11, The Long Road Ahead. Reflect on the movement's progress, setbacks, and future. Epilogue, A Call to Action. The book concludes with a plea to readers: recognize the shared humanity in the stories of workers and join the fight for justice. It's not about politics, it's about dignity, fairness, and the promise of America. Broken Promises, The Fight for Workers' Rights in America, A Story of Resilience, Resistance, and the Battle for Justice. Prologue, The Spark. Elias Vargas had never missed a shift in 15 years. A devoted father and immigrant from Honduras, he took pride in his work at Agripack Industries, a bustling meatpacking plant in the heart of Millridge, Ohio. The job wasn't glamorous, it was grueling, dangerous, and poorly paid, but it kept his family fed and the lights on in their modest home. The morning of the accident began like any other. Eliot's hands moved with practiced precision as he worked the conveyor line. The hum of machinery was almost comforting in its monotony. But when a piece of equipment malfunctioned, sending a massive steel rod crashing into Eliot's arm, the world as he knew it changed in an instant. The pain was blinding, but worse was the fear that followed. In the days after the accident, Eliot filed a workers' compensation claim, confident that the system meant to protect people like him would help him recover. Instead, Agripack denied his claim, citing a pre-existing condition he never knew he had. With no income and mounting medical bills, Eliot's life spiraled into a nightmare. His story was not unique. Across the country, injured workers were being denied the care and compensation they deserved, victims of a system rigged in favor of corporations. It was a silent epidemic, hidden behind closed doors and legal loopholes. But Eliot, unknowingly, had just lit the spark of a movement that would challenge it all. Chapter 1, The Fall of Elias Vargas. Eliot's hospital room was cold and sterile, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the silence. He stared at the bandages wrapped around the stump where his arm used to be. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, but Eliot didn't feel lucky. He felt broken. When the hospital administrator handed him a stack of papers from Agripack's insurer, Eliot expected reassurance. Instead, the letter stated his claim had been denied. The listed reason? A congenital condition they claimed made his bones weaker than average, a condition Eliot had never been diagnosed with before. Congenital? Eliot whispered to himself, his voice shaking. I've worked there for 15 years. Never missed a day. The denial meant Eliot couldn't afford the prosthetic the doctors recommended. It meant his mortgage payments were at risk, his daughter's college savings would be drained, and his wife, Marisol, would have to take on more hours at her cleaning job. The weight of it all pressed on his chest like an iron slab. Discovering the system's flaws, Elliot's co-worker, Ramon Estrada, visited him soon after the denial. A former union organizer turned community advocate, Ramon listened quietly as Elliot recounted his ordeal. When Elliot finished, Ramon leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're not alone, hermano," Ramon said. "This is how they operate. Deny, delay, and make you desperate enough to give up." Ramon explained how corporations like Agripac used every trick in the book to minimize their liability. Independent medical examiners, paid for by the company, often blamed pre-existing conditions. Claims adjusters delayed paperwork until workers missed deadlines. And when that didn't work, companies hired lawyers to overwhelm claimants in court. "Workers' comp was supposed to protect us," Ramon said. "But now? It protects them." Meeting Kate Donovan desperate for help, Elliot reached out to a local journalist, Kate Donovan. Known for her investigative reporting on labor issues, Kate had a reputation for taking on powerful interests. When she met Elliot at a diner in Millridge, her notebook was already half filled with questions. "Tell me everything," Kate said, her voice steady but warm. Elliot hesitated, embarrassed by the raw emotion in his voice as he recounted his story. But Kate didn't flinch. She listened intently, her pen moving furiously across the page. "This isn't just about you, Elliot," Kate said when he finished. "This is happening everywhere. And people need to know." Kate promised to dig deeper into Agripac's practices. She suspected Elliot's denial wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger pattern of corporate abuse. The spark of determination in her eyes gave Elliot a sliver of hope. The first steps of resistance encouraged by Ramon and Kate, Elliot began speaking out about his experience. Ramon introduced him to other injured workers, each with a story more heartbreaking than the last. A young mother whose carpal tunnel claim was denied. A warehouse worker fired after reporting a back injury. A nurse with PTSD left without mental health care because her state didn't recognize psychological injuries under workers' comp. As Elliot listened to their stories, he realized the magnitude of the problem. His fight wasn't just about his arm, it was about justice for all workers. At Ramon's urging, Elliot attended a town hall meeting on labor rights. Standing before a small crowd of union members and activists, he shared his story for the first time. His voice trembled, but the audience's nods and murmurs of agreement spurred him on. "We need to fight this," Elliot said, his voice gaining strength. "Not just for me, but for every worker out there." The room erupted in applause. It was the first time Elliot felt something other than despair since his accident. For the first time, he felt hope. Chapter 2, Exposing the System. Introduction. Cracks beneath the surface. Kate Donovan sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files, court transcripts, and a rapidly filling notebook. The deeper she dug into Elliot Vargas's case, the more obvious it became. His story wasn't unique. It was a symptom of a far larger problem, one that stretched far beyond Millridge and the walls of Agripac Industries. With each call and interview, Kate pieced together a mosaic of systemic failures that left injured workers abandoned. Her investigation would take her from local courtrooms to the offices of lobbyists in Washington, exposing the deliberate policies and practices that allowed corporations to profit at the expense of their employees. The independent medical exam scam. Kate's first breakthrough came when she interviewed Dr. Philip Stanton, a retired orthopedic surgeon who had spent years performing independent medical examinations. These evaluations, required by insurers to confirm or deny claims, were supposed to be impartial. But Stanton revealed the ugly truth. "They don't pay you to be honest," Stanton said bluntly. "They pay you to find reasons to deny the claim." Stanton described how insurers provided him with pre-written summaries emphasizing pre-existing conditions or minor inconsistencies in patient stories. "It's a numbers game," he admitted. "Every claim denied saves them thousands. And they don't care about the consequences." Kate's article exposing IME practices hit the front page of the local paper, sparking outrage among readers. Workers began coming forward with their own stories of biased evaluations and unfair denials. Eliot's case expands. Encouraged by the public response, Eliot decided to share more details of his own experience. He allowed Kate access to his denial letter and medical records, which revealed discrepancies between his treating physician's diagnosis and the IME report Agripac used to reject his claim. Kate cross-referenced Eliot's case with others she had uncovered and found a disturbing trend. Dozens of workers injured at Agripac had their claims denied based on IMEs conducted by the same small network of doctors. She began compiling the evidence into a damning exposé titled Broken Promises: How IMEs Are Failing America's Workers. The systemic inequities. Kate's investigation expanded beyond Agripac. She analyzed national data and uncovered shocking disparities in workers' compensation systems across states. In Alabama, the maximum payout for losing an arm was $48,840. In Illinois, it was $439,858. Mental health claims were almost universally ignored, even in cases of workplace violence or trauma. States with strong business lobbies had significantly lower compensation rates and higher denial rates than worker-friendly states. The lack of federal oversight allowed these disparities to persist, leaving injured workers at the mercy of state legislatures heavily influenced by corporate interests. Carlos's revelation. Meanwhile, Carlos Alvarez, Eliot's co-worker and close friend, shared his own struggles. As an undocumented worker, Carlos had suffered a back injury but never reported it, fearing retaliation and deportation. He revealed how Agripac relied heavily on undocumented labor, knowing these workers were less likely to file claims or demand fair treatment. Carlos's story shed light on another facet of the system's failures: the exploitation of vulnerable workers. Kate included his account in her reporting, anonymizing his identity to protect him. His story struck a chord with readers, igniting a conversation about the intersection of labor rights and immigration reform. Following the money, Kate's investigation began to reveal the financial machinery behind the system. She discovered that Agripac wasn't acting alone. It was part of a larger network of corporations, insurers, and lobbyists working to minimize liability and maximize profits. Key findings: lobbyist influence. The American Legislative Exchange Council had drafted model legislation that reduced workers' compensation benefits and made it harder to file claims. Many states had adopted these laws almost verbatim. Dark money. Agripac funneled campaign donations through PACs to influence state lawmakers. Corporate tactics. Insurance companies used delay tactics to wear down claimants, often settling for a fraction of what workers were owed. The first signs of pushback. Kate's articles gained traction, but they also drew backlash. Agripac's legal team sent her a cease and desist letter, accusing her of defamation. Her editor, nervous about potential lawsuits, asked her to scale back her reporting. Kate refused. "If they're trying to silence me, it means I'm onto something," she told her editor. "We can't stop now." Eliot, too, faced retaliation. Agripac sent him a final notice demanding repayment of medical expenses they had initially covered, claiming his injury wasn't work-related. Ramon Estrada stepped in, helping Eliot file a countersuit to challenge the company's practices. Ramon's organizing efforts. While Kate dug deeper into the systemic issues, Ramon worked to build a coalition of injured workers willing to speak out. He organized small meetings at local union halls and community centers, where workers shared their experiences and discussed strategies for change. One night, Ramon addressed a packed room. "This system wasn't built for us, it was built for them," he said, gesturing toward the factory across the street. "But if we stand together, we can make them listen." Eliot, inspired by Ramon's passion, spoke at the meeting. It was the first time he'd shared his story publicly, and the room's reaction was electric. Workers who had been hesitant to speak out began volunteering to join the cause. The power of stories. Kate's reporting and Ramon's organizing began to converge. As more workers came forward, their stories created a powerful narrative that was impossible to ignore. Eliot's journey became a symbol of resilience, while Carlos's plight highlighted the urgency of reform for undocumented workers. The coalition drafted a list of demands, including federal oversight of workers' compensation to ensure consistency across states, legal protections for whistleblowers and injured workers, an independent review process to replace biased IMEs. The movement was gaining momentum, but the road ahead would not be easy. Chapter 3: Corporate Greed Unmasked. Introduction. Following the money. As the coalition grew, so did the scope of Kate Donovan's investigation. She had exposed the biased medical examinations and uneven state systems that failed injured workers, but her latest findings pointed to something even more sinister. The systemic exploitation of workers was not a coincidence, it was a business model. Behind the facade of state workers' compensation systems were private equity firms, insurers, and corporate giants who had turned the suffering of injured workers into a lucrative profit stream. This chapter dives into the dark underbelly of corporate greed and its devastating impact on workers like Elliot, Carlos, and countless others. The role of private equity. Kate uncovered that Agripac's workers' compensation insurer, Midwest WorkComp, was owned by a private equity firm. The firm had a straightforward strategy: maximize short-term profits by reducing payouts to injured workers. Through a whistleblower at Midwest WorkComp, Kate learned how the company operated: aggressive claim denials. Claims adjusters were incentivized to find reasons to reject or delay cases, no matter how legitimate. Doctor shopping. The insurer maintained a roster of yes and no doctors, medical professionals who could be counted on to either support or deny claims based on the company's needs. Automation and denials. Algorithms flagged claims likely to be costly and labeled them as high scrutiny, often leading to automatic denials without a proper review. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, Kate wrote in her next expose. They are lives torn apart for the sake of a quarterly earnings report. Elliot's continued struggles. Elliot's case was a prime example of Midwest WorkComp's tactics. His denial had been based on a pre-existing condition that had no bearing on his injury. But as Kate dug deeper, she found emails between the claims adjuster and an internal compliance officer discussing ways to justify the rejection. They knew, Kate told Elliot during a late-night call. They knew they were wrong, but they did it anyway. Elliot's frustration turned to resolve. With Kate's help, he filed a formal complaint with the state labor board, though he knew the odds of success were slim. Carlos and the exploitation of immigrant workers. Carlos Alvarez's story revealed another layer of corporate greed. Agripac routinely hired undocumented workers for its most dangerous jobs, knowing they were less likely to report injuries. When Carlos injured his back lifting a crate of frozen meat, his supervisor pressured him to keep quiet. "If you report this, they'll call ICE," his supervisor warned. Carlos's fear of deportation kept him silent until he met Ramon. Through the coalition, Carlos found the courage to speak out. His story became a cornerstone of the movement, highlighting the intersection of labor exploitation and immigration policy. Vocational trapdoors. One of the coalition's most shocking discoveries was the abuse of vocational rehabilitation programs. These programs were supposed to help injured workers return to the workforce, but in reality, they often served as another tool to deny benefits. Kate interviewed Maria Garcia, a former warehouse worker who had been sent to a vocational school after a workplace injury left her unable to lift heavy objects. The school promised to retrain her for an office job, but instead provided substandard instruction in outdated software. After 6 months, Maria was declared employable, even though she couldn't find a single job. "It's a scam," Maria told Kate. "They just use it to cut off your benefits." Private equity firms own many of these vocational schools, profiting handsomely from taxpayer dollars while providing little to no value to injured workers. The insurance industry's playbook. Midwest WorkComp wasn't unique. Kate found similar patterns across the country, with insurers adopting tactics to minimize payouts. Utilization review companies. Insurers contracted third-party companies to scrutinize medical claims and recommend denials. Delay tactics. Paperwork was intentionally lost or delayed, pushing injured workers into financial desperation. Settlements under duress. Workers were pressured to accept lowball settlements to avoid prolonged legal battles. One claims adjuster, speaking anonymously, described the process. "You wear them down until they give up. That's the game." Ramon's rallying cry as the coalition learned more about the systemic exploitation. Ramon Estrada organized a march on the state capitol. Hundreds of workers, including Elliot and Carlos, gathered to demand accountability. At the rally, Ramon addressed the crowd with his characteristic passion. These corporations treat us like we're disposable. They make billions off our backs, and when we're hurt, they throw us away. It's time to fight back. It's time to take back what's ours. The march drew media attention, forcing state lawmakers to respond. Though many dismissed the rally as a publicity stunt, others began to take notice. The backlash to coalition's growing influence came with consequences. Agripac filed a lawsuit against Ramon, alleging defamation for his public statements. Carlos received anonymous threats warning him to stop speaking out. Even Kate faced pressure from her editor, who worried about losing advertisers. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest," her editor warned. "Good," Kate replied. "It's about time someone did." A national spotlight, Kate's latest article, "Profit Over People: The Exploitation of Injured Workers," went viral. Major news outlets picked up the story, bringing national attention to the coalition's fight. Progressive leaders like Shema Sawant and Dr. Jill Stein publicly voiced their support, calling for federal action to address the systemic abuses. The attention was a double-edged sword. While it energized the coalition, it also intensified opposition from corporate interests. Agripac doubled its lobbying efforts, and negative ads painted the movement as anti-business and radical. Chapter 4, Vocational Trapdoors Introduction, The Illusion of Opportunity. Elias Vargas sat in a small classroom with 5 other injured workers, each clutching a workbook filled with outdated exercises. A banner on the wall read, "Your path back to work starts here." The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. This was Agripac's idea of vocational rehabilitation, a program supposedly designed to retrain injured workers, but, in reality, a hollow promise that served only to cut costs and deny benefits. This chapter explores the fraudulent vocational programs used to exploit injured workers, turning their hopes for a fresh start into another avenue of despair. Maria Garcia's story. Maria Garcia, a former warehouse worker, was among the first to expose the sham of vocational rehabilitation. After a shoulder injury left her unable to perform physical labor, her employer's insurer referred her to a state-approved vocational training program. "They promised I'd learn computer skills and get an office job," Maria told Kate Donovan during an interview. "But the classes were a joke. The computers barely worked, and the instructors didn't care." After 6 months, Maria was declared fit for work, despite her limited skills and ongoing pain. The insurer used this declaration to terminate her benefits, leaving Maria with no income and no prospects. Elliot's experience. Elliot found himself in a similar program. The curriculum included basic typing lessons and tutorials on software programs no longer used in the modern workplace. The instructors showed little interest in his progress, and Elliot quickly realized the program's true purpose: to create a paper trail that would allow the insurer to cut off his benefits. One day, Elliot confronted the program's director. "How is this supposed to help me get a job?" he asked. The director shrugged. "We're here to provide the training. What you do with it is up to you." The role of private equity. Kate's investigation revealed that many vocational rehabilitation programs were owned by private equity firms, which operated them as profit-driven enterprises. These companies received funding from insurers and state workers' compensation systems but provided minimal services in return. Key findings: substandard instruction. Classes were often led by unqualified instructors and used outdated materials. High profit margins. Private equity-backed programs charged exorbitant fees for their services, often billing insurers for unnecessary or ineffective training. Fraudulent certifications. Some programs issued fake certificates of completion, falsely claiming workers were qualified for specialized jobs. The diploma mills. Kate uncovered a network of so-called vocational diploma mills that issued certifications without requiring any real training. These certifications were used to justify the termination of workers' benefits, even when they had no practical value. One such program offered a certified office professional certificate after just 2 weeks of classes. When Kate called to inquire about the program, posing as a potential enrollee, the administrator assured her, "Don't worry. Everyone passes." Carlos Alvarez, still struggling with his own injury, joined the coalition's efforts to expose vocational fraud. As a former farm worker, he understood the systemic challenges faced by injured laborers, particularly immigrants. Carlos connected with other workers who had been funneled into similar programs, many of whom were non-English speakers. They shared stories of being misled, ignored, and ultimately abandoned by the system. Carlos helped organize a town hall meeting where workers testified about their experiences. The event drew local media attention, putting additional pressure on state regulators. Ramon's strategic move. Ramon Estrada recognized an opportunity to strike at the heart of the problem. Using the leaked documents from Agripac, he traced financial ties between the company's insurer and several fraudulent vocational programs. The documents revealed that Agripac had a direct stake in one of the largest diploma mills in the region. Ramon presented the findings at a press conference, flanked by Maria, Elliot, and Carlos. "This isn't just negligence," Ramon said. "This is exploitation, pure and simple." The first lawsuit with Maya Rao's legal expertise, the coalition filed a class action lawsuit against Agripac and its insurer, accusing them of defrauding injured workers through sham vocational programs. The lawsuit named Maria and Elliot as lead plaintiffs, making their stories the centerpiece of the case. Maya faced significant challenges. The defendants hired a team of high-powered lawyers who argued that the programs met state requirements and that any shortcomings were the fault of individual workers. "This isn't about state compliance," Maya countered during a hearing. "It's about a system designed to fail the very people it claims to help." The coalition's growing momentum. The lawsuit galvanized the movement, drawing support from unions, advocacy groups, and even some lawmakers. Progressive leaders like Shema Sawant and Dr. Jill Stein amplified the coalition's message, framing it as a broader issue of corporate accountability. Kate's article on vocational fraud, titled "Trapdoors Disguised as Ladders," went viral, exposing the issue to a national audience. Donations poured into the coalition, allowing them to expand their organizing efforts. Corporate retaliation. The success of the lawsuit and media coverage brought fierce retaliation. Agripac launched a smear campaign against Ramon, digging up old disputes from his union days. Maria received anonymous threats warning her to drop the case. Even Maya found her law firm targeted by frivolous complaints designed to drain its resources. Despite the pressure, the coalition stood firm. "They're scared," Elliot said at a meeting. "And they should be. We're not backing down." Chapter 5, Silent Wounds. Introduction. Invisible Scars. Rosa Alvarez sat in her car outside the hospital where she had worked as a nurse for over a decade. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her hands trembling. Her chest felt heavy, as if a weight she couldn't shake pressed down on her. Rosa hadn't worked a shift in months, not since the patient assault that left her physically unharmed but mentally shattered. Injured workers like Rosa often bear scars that can't be seen, wounds that the workers' compensation system is unequipped or unwilling to treat. This chapter delves into the emotional and psychological toll of workplace injuries, exposing how systemic failures amplify suffering. Rosa's story. Rosa's troubles began during a particularly chaotic shift in the hospital's ER. A patient in a drug-induced rage attacked her, shoving her into a wall and screaming threats. Though her physical injuries were minor, the psychological impact was profound. "I couldn't sleep," Rosa recalled. "I kept replaying it in my head, thinking I should have done something differently. I started avoiding my friends, my family, even myself." When Rosa filed a workers' compensation claim, she expected support. Instead, the insurer denied her request for mental health treatment, arguing that psychological injuries were not covered under state law unless accompanied by severe physical harm. Elliot's struggles. Elliot Vargas, too, faced the psychological aftermath of his injury. The loss of his arm wasn't just a physical trauma, it was a blow to his identity as a provider and father. Depression crept in, leaving him feeling disconnected from the world. I didn't want to admit I needed help, Elliot confessed to Rosa during a coalition meeting. But pretending I was fine didn't make it go away. Through Ramon Estrada's encouragement, Elliot finally sought counseling, but the process was fraught with barriers. His workers' compensation plan required pre-approval for mental health services, which was repeatedly delayed or denied. Kate's investigation, Kate Donovan's reporting on mental health and workers' compensation, revealed alarming trends: exclusion of mental health claims. Many states did not recognize conditions like PTSD, anxiety, or depression as valid workplace injuries. Delays in treatment. Even in states that allowed mental health claims, the approval process was slow, often leaving workers without support during critical recovery periods. Stigma and isolation. Workers who pursued mental health claims faced skepticism and stigma, compounding their emotional struggles. Kate's article, Silent Wounds, The Hidden Cost of Workplace Trauma, highlighted stories like Rosa's and Elliot's, drawing attention to a crisis often overlooked in discussions about labor rights. Carlos and the immigrant experience. For Carlos Alvarez, the psychological toll of his injury was compounded by his immigration status. Living in constant fear of deportation, Carlos felt he couldn't speak openly about his struggles. I didn't just lose my ability to work, Carlos told the coalition. I lost my dignity. And every day, I wake up wondering if today's the day they take it all away. Carlos's story underscored the intersection of mental health and systemic inequities, particularly for vulnerable workers. The coalition began organizing support groups for injured workers, creating spaces where they could share their experiences without fear of judgment or retaliation. The system's failures. Ramon Estrada, drawing on his years of union organizing, described how the system's neglect of mental health was not accidental. It's by design, he told the coalition during a strategy meeting. The less they acknowledge the problem, the less they have to pay to fix it. Through leaked documents from Agripac's insurer, Kate uncovered internal memos detailing strategies to minimize mental health claims, raising the burden of proof, requiring extensive documentation from multiple providers to approve a claim. Denying early requests, relying on the assumption that workers would give up after an initial denial, blaming workers, framing mental health struggles as personal failings rather than workplace-related issues. Building a case for reform. Maya Rao, the coalition's legal expert, began drafting a proposal to address the systemic neglect of psychological injuries. The proposed reforms included mandatory coverage for mental health claims, ensuring PTSD, depression, and anxiety were treated as legitimate workplace injuries, streamlined approval processes, reducing delays and paperwork for mental health treatments. Worker protections against stigma, enforcing anti-retaliation measures for workers who pursued mental health claims. Rosa volunteered to testify before a legislative committee considering the reforms. I'm tired of feeling invisible, she said. If my story can help someone else, it's worth it. The first testimony. Rosa's testimony was raw and emotional, recounting the assault and its aftermath in vivid detail. I gave everything to my job, she told the committee. But when I needed help, the system turned its back on me. Her words moved some lawmakers to tears, but others questioned the financial implications of the proposed reforms. One senator, backed by corporate interests, argued that expanding mental health coverage would bankrupt the system. What about the cost of doing nothing? Rosa fired back, her voice steady. How many more people have to suffer in silence before we act? Grassroots support. The coalition organized a series of rallies and town halls to build momentum for the reforms. Elliot spoke at one event, sharing his struggles with depression and the support he found through the coalition. I'm still fighting, Elliot said, his voice breaking. But I'm not fighting alone anymore. And neither are you. The rallies drew national attention, with media outlets covering the coalition's efforts. The movement gained endorsements from mental health organizations and high-profile figures like Dr. Jill Stein, who called for federal standards to address the issue. Corporate pushback. As the movement grew, so did opposition from corporate lobbyists. Agripac funded a campaign claiming the proposed reforms would lead to higher premiums and job losses. Negative ads painted injured workers as fraudsters looking for handouts. Kate countered with a series of articles exposing the lobbyists' tactics and highlighting the real costs of neglecting mental health. The only people profiting from this system are the ones who built it, she wrote. A small victory despite fierce opposition, the state legislature passed a bill mandating coverage for PTSD and workplace-related mental health claims. It was a narrow victory, and the reforms fell short of the coalition's broader goals, but it was a step in the right direction. Rosa, watching the vote from the gallery, felt a mix of relief and determination. This isn't the end, she told Elliot. It's just the beginning. Chapter 6, Profits Over People. Introduction, a rigged system. As the coalition celebrated its small victory in securing mental health reforms, Kate Donovan delved deeper into the corporate machinery driving the exploitation of injured workers. The deeper she went, the more she realized this wasn't just about one company, one industry, or even one state. It was a national issue, entrenched in a system designed to prioritize profits over people. Agripack Industries was a prime example. Despite its public image as a community-oriented company, Agripack's practices revealed a chilling disregard for its workers. The company's actions were not anomalies, they were part of a calculated strategy to minimize costs and maximize profits, regardless of the human cost. Elliot's spiraling costs. Elias Vargas was a living testament to the system's failures. After his accident, he received only a fraction of the compensation he was entitled to. When his benefits were denied entirely, he fell behind on his mortgage and car payments. His wife, Marisol, took on extra shifts, but it wasn't enough. I've given them everything, Elliot told Ramon Estrada during a meeting. And this is how they repay me? Elliot's mounting medical bills and legal fees became a rallying cry for the coalition. He was no longer just a victim, he was a symbol of resistance against a system that preyed on the vulnerable. Agripack's financial playbook. Through a whistleblower inside Agripack's finance department, Kate obtained internal documents revealing the company's cost-cutting strategies. The playbook was simple but ruthless, maximizing denials, deny as many workers' compensation claims as possible to reduce payouts, settlements under pressure, offer lowball settlements to injured workers who couldn't afford prolonged legal battles. Lobbying for deregulation, spend millions on lobbying efforts to weaken state-level labor protections. Point 1 memo included a chilling phrase, the fewer claims we approve, the better for the bottom line. Carlos's fight for justice. Carlos Alvarez's back injury had left him unable to work, but Agripack's reliance on undocumented labor ensured that workers like him rarely sought justice. Encouraged by the coalition, Carlos decided to file a claim despite his fears. I know the risks, Carlos said during a coalition meeting. But if we don't fight, they'll keep doing this to people like me. Carlos's courage inspired others to step forward, including several undocumented workers who shared their stories anonymously with Kate. These testimonies highlighted the unique vulnerabilities of immigrant laborers and the companies that exploited them. The insurance industry's role. Kate's reporting also exposed how insurers profited from the broken system. By partnering with cost containment firms and utilization review companies, insurance providers created layers of bureaucracy designed to delay or deny claims. Key findings: utilization reviews. Third-party companies reviewed medical treatments and often deemed them unnecessary, even when prescribed by a worker's primary physician. Delay tactics. Insurers frequently lost paperwork or requested duplicate forms to drag out the claims process. Profit margins. Insurance companies reported record profits while injured workers like Elliot were left destitute. Point 1 Former claims adjuster, speaking anonymously, revealed, "We were trained to look for any excuse to deny a claim. The goal wasn't fairness, it was savings." The cost of doing nothing. At a coalition rally, Ramon Estrada delivered a fiery speech highlighting the broader implications of corporate greed. Every denied claim, every unpaid bill, every ruined life. It all adds up. And while they rake in profits, we pay the price. Ramon shared statistics from Kate's reporting. Workplace injuries and illnesses cost the U.S. economy over $250 billion annually. Injured workers were twice as likely to fall into poverty compared to their uninjured counterparts. Suicide rates among injured workers were significantly higher than the general population. These aren't just numbers, Ramon said. They're people. They're us. Maria's new struggles. Maria Garcia, the former warehouse worker turned activist, found herself at the center of the coalition's legal battle against Agripac. As the lead plaintiff in the class action lawsuit, Maria faced intense scrutiny. The company's lawyers tried to discredit her by digging into her past, questioning her education, and implying that her injury wasn't severe enough to warrant compensation. They'll do anything to protect their profits, Maria told Maya Rao, the coalition's attorney. But they won't scare me off. Maria's resilience became a beacon of hope for the movement, inspiring others to stand their ground. Corporate propaganda. In response to growing public pressure, Agripac launched a multi-million-dollar PR campaign portraying itself as a model employer. Television ads featured smiling workers and upbeat music, with slogans like Agripac, where family comes first. Kate exposed the campaign as a sham, using leaked emails showing that many of the workers featured in the ads were actors, not actual employees. Her article, The Smiling Faces of Exploitation, went viral, further damaging Agripac's reputation. Grassroots pushback. The coalition organized protests outside Agripac's headquarters, drawing workers, community members, and even national media attention. One protester held a sign that read, "Profits over people is not the American way." The protests culminated in a sit-in at the State Labor Board, demanding an investigation into Agripac's practices. While the board initially resisted, the growing public outcry forced them to open an inquiry. The turning point. In a dramatic turn of events, Kate received another leak, this time financial records showing that Agripac executives had received massive bonuses tied directly to reductions in workers' compensation payouts. The revelation sparked outrage and calls for a federal investigation. Ramon addressed the coalition during an emergency meeting. "This is it. This is our moment. They've shown us who they are, and now it's time to show them who we are." Chapter 7, The Elite's Playbook. Introduction. The power behind the curtain. As Kate Donovan's reporting gained national attention, the coalition began to see the true scope of the forces aligned against them. The injustices faced by injured workers weren't just a result of corporate greed, they were the deliberate outcome of a system carefully designed and maintained by political and economic elites. Through leaked documents, insider interviews, and relentless research, the coalition uncovered a sophisticated network of lobbyists, lawmakers, and corporate executives working together to protect their interests at the expense of workers' rights. This chapter exposes the playbook used by the elite to maintain control and suppress change. The role of Alec Ramon Estrada had long suspected that anti-worker policies were not crafted in isolation. His suspicions were confirmed when Kate uncovered a treasure trove of documents from the American Legislative Exchange Council. The powerful organization, funded by corporations and wealthy donors, crafted model legislation aimed at weakening workers' rights. Key findings: Alec's model bills included provisions to cap workers' compensation benefits, narrow the definition of compensable injuries, and limit access to legal representation for injured workers. State legislators, often unaware of the bill's origins, introduced them as their own initiatives, claiming they were designed to reduce fraud and promote economic growth. Agripac had been a major donor to Alec, with its executives attending private conferences where these policies were developed. Kate's article, Writing the Rules: How Alec Shapes America's Workers' Compensation Laws, sent shockwaves through the political landscape. Political complicity. As the coalition traced the flow of money, it became clear that corporate donations weren't limited to lobbying organizations like Alec. Politicians on both sides of the aisle had accepted significant contributions from industries tied to workers' compensation reforms. Carlos Alvarez, inspired by Kate's findings, took a deep dive into campaign finance records. What he found was damning. A key state senator who had opposed the coalition's reforms had received over $500,000 in donations from insurance companies. Political action committees funded by private equity firms backing vocational programs had donated millions to federal candidates, ensuring their interests were represented at every level of government. "Both parties are in on it," Carlos said during a coalition meeting. "They just wear different masks." The courts as gatekeepers. Maya Rao, the coalition's attorney, highlighted another critical component of the elite's playbook: the judiciary. Decades of appointments by corporate-friendly administrations had tilted the courts in favor of business interests. In one case, Maya represented a worker who had been denied benefits after a blatant injury on the job. Despite overwhelming evidence, the judge ruled in favor of the employer, citing a narrow interpretation of state law. These judges aren't impartial, Maya explained to the coalition. They're part of the system designed to keep us down. Kate's reporting revealed that many of these judges had ties to the industries they were supposed to regulate. Some had even worked as lawyers for insurance companies before taking the bench. The influence of think tanks. The coalition also uncovered the role of conservative think tanks in shaping public opinion. Organizations like the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute published reports warning that expanding workers' rights would lead to economic ruin. These reports are propaganda, Kate wrote in her next article. They're designed to scare lawmakers and voters into protecting the status quo. Through social media campaigns and op-eds in major newspapers, these think tanks spread misinformation about the coalition's goals, portraying them as radical and anti-business. The smear campaign. As the coalition's influence grew, so did the attacks against them. Agripac hired a high-profile PR firm to discredit the movement. The firm launched a series of ads accusing the coalition of spreading falsehoods and harming local businesses. Maria Garcia, who had become a prominent face of the movement, found herself targeted by a smear campaign. An anonymous website published fabricated stories about her personal life, claiming she was a serial litigant who exploited the system. They want to scare us into silence, Maria said during a coalition meeting. But I won't back down. The corporate state nexus. Kate's most explosive revelation came when she uncovered direct communications between Agripac executives and state officials. Emails showed that the company had lobbied the governor's office to veto a workers' rights bill, promising campaign contributions in exchange. The scandal sparked outrage, with protesters gathering outside the state capitol. Ramon, addressing the crowd, declared, "This isn't just about workers. This is about democracy itself. If we let them by our laws, what's left for the rest of us?" A glimmer of hope. Despite the overwhelming opposition, the coalition began to see signs of progress. Lawmakers who had initially ignored their pleas started reaching out, sensing the growing public pressure. Progressive leaders like Shema Sawant and Dr. Jill Stein amplified the movement's message, calling for federal oversight of workers' compensation. "The system is broken," Sawant said during a televised interview. "And it's broken by design. It's time for workers to take it back." Chapter 8, Grassroots Resistance. Introduction. Rising Voices. The coalition's journey to Washington, D.C., was not just a physical trip, it was the culmination of months of organizing, rallying, and connecting workers across the country. What began as a small, localized effort in Millridge, Ohio, had grown into a nationwide movement. Injured workers, union members, immigrant laborers, and everyday Americans joined forces to demand justice. This chapter captures the coalition's efforts to mobilize grassroots support, highlighting the power of collective action in the face of systemic injustice. The National Workers' Bill of Rights. The cornerstone of the coalition's push for change was the National Workers' Bill of Rights, a comprehensive proposal that aimed to establish federal standards for workers' compensation to eliminate state-by-state disparities, mandate mental health coverage, and address the systemic neglect of psychological injuries. Penalize corporations and insurers for wrongful denials of claims. Protect immigrant workers from retaliation when filing claims. Ensure vocational programs provided real, marketable skills. "We need a unified standard," Ramon Estrada explained during a press briefing. "An arm in Alabama should be worth the same as an arm in Illinois. That's basic fairness." Building a movement to build momentum, the coalition organized a series of town halls, rallies, and community events across the country. Elias Vargas, Maria Garcia, Rosa Alvarez, and Carlos Alvarez became the faces of the movement, sharing their stories to inspire others. Eliot's appeal. At a rally in Chicago, Eliot addressed a crowd of over 1,000 people. "I'm not just here for me," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I'm here for every worker who's been told their pain doesn't matter. For every family torn apart because the system failed them. Maria's call to action. In Los Angeles, Maria led a town hall where workers discussed their experiences with fraudulent vocational programs. "We're not asking for special treatment," Maria told the audience. "We're asking for justice." Carlos's courage. Carlos shared his story during a televised interview, risking exposure as an undocumented worker. "We contribute to this country every day," he said. "All we're asking is to be treated with dignity." Social media and the digital frontline. The coalition leveraged social media to amplify their message. Kate Donovan partnered with digital strategists to create viral content, including videos highlighting the disparities in workers' compensation laws and testimonials from injured workers. A particularly powerful video featured Rosa Alvarez, who recounted her struggles with PTSD and her fight to receive treatment. The video ended with the tagline, "No worker should be invisible." It garnered millions of views and sparked widespread discussions online. Challenges on the ground. Despite their growing momentum, the coalition faced significant obstacles. Corporate-funded groups staged counter-protests, framing the movement as anti-business and socialist. Negative ads portrayed the coalition's leaders as radicals intent on destroying the economy. Ramon Estrada, however, remained undeterred. "When they can't argue with the truth, they attack the people telling it," he said during a strategy meeting. "That just means we're winning." Allies in unexpected places. While much of the political establishment remained resistant, the coalition found allies in surprising corners. A group of moderate Republicans, alarmed by the treatment of injured veterans under the workers' compensation system, joined the cause. Representative Laura Mills, a conservative lawmaker from Nebraska, publicly endorsed the National Workers' Bill of Rights. "This isn't about politics," Mills said during a press conference. "It's about basic human decency. No worker, no matter their party, race, or background, should be left to fend for themselves after an injury." Her endorsement added credibility to the movement, showing that the issue transcended partisan lines. The March on Washington. The coalition's efforts culminated in a massive march on Washington, D.C. Workers from every state, carrying signs and banners, filled the National Mall. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of anger, hope, and determination. Speakers included injured workers, union leaders, immigrant advocates, and progressive politicians. Ramon Estrada delivered the keynote address, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "This is our time. This is our fight. And we won't stop until every worker in America is treated with the dignity they deserve." The march was covered extensively by the media, bringing the coalition's demands to the forefront of the national conversation. Pressure in Congress. Following the march, the coalition began lobbying lawmakers directly. Kate Donovan provided each member of Congress with a copy of her investigative series, while Elias and Maria met with staffers to share their personal experiences. The National Workers' Bill of Rights gained traction in the House, with a growing number of co-sponsors from both parties. However, opposition remained fierce in the Senate, where corporate lobbyists wielded significant influence. Chapter 9, Workers in the Age of AI and Climate Crisis. Introduction. A new frontier. The world was changing faster than anyone could have anticipated. Automation and artificial intelligence were revolutionizing industries, while climate change brought increasingly frequent disasters that threatened workers' lives and livelihoods. For the coalition, these challenges were not separate from their fight for justice, they were an extension of it. In this chapter, the coalition grapples with the dual threats of technological disruption and environmental collapse, pushing for universal protections to ensure no worker is left behind. The rise of automation. Elias Vargas stood outside the Agripac plant, watching as new robotic systems were installed on the production line. He felt a pang of bitterness. The same company that had refused to pay for his prosthetic arm was now investing millions in machines that could replace human workers altogether. "They say it's progress," Elias said to Ramon Estrada. "But it feels like they're just finding new ways to get rid of us." Kate Donovan's reporting revealed that Agripac was not alone. Across the country, corporations were replacing workers with automated systems, often without offering retraining or severance packages. For injured workers like Elias, the shift to automation was especially devastating, as it made re-entry into the workforce even harder. Key findings: low-wage and manual labor jobs were among the first to be automated, disproportionately affecting already vulnerable workers. Companies often cited cost savings as the reason for automation but rarely invested those savings in supporting displaced workers. The lack of federal standards for retraining programs left many workers unprepared for the transition. Carlos faces a new challenge. Carlos Alvarez, who had finally secured limited compensation for his back injury, found himself facing another crisis. The farm where he once worked was experimenting with autonomous tractors and drone technology, drastically reducing the need for human labor. Carlos joined a group of displaced farm workers advocating for protections against job loss due to automation. The demands included retraining programs for workers displaced by technology, universal basic income to provide financial stability during transitions, policies to ensure companies that automate invest in community development. This isn't just about machines, Carlos said during a town hall. It's about people. It's about families. Climate change and the new frontline. As the coalition worked to address the impacts of automation, they were blindsided by another crisis, a massive hurricane that devastated the Gulf Coast. Among the hardest hit were agricultural workers, construction crews, and first responders, many of whom were left without adequate safety protections or disaster relief. Maria Garcia traveled to Louisiana to support workers rebuilding in the hurricane's aftermath. She was horrified by what she saw: construction workers forced to operate in unsafe conditions without proper equipment or training, migrant laborers living in makeshift camps, exposed to the elements and without access to health care. First responders suffering from PTSD and physical injuries, with little to no compensation for their sacrifices. Maria's experiences became the basis for a new coalition demand: federal protections for climate-affected workers. AI's dark side. Kate's investigation into AI revealed another disturbing trend: corporations were using AI to monitor and control their workers. From warehouses to call centers, algorithms tracked every movement, every keystroke, and even workers' heart rates, often leading to punitive actions for minor infractions. AI was supposed to make work easier, Kate wrote in her article, machines watching people, but in many industries, it's become a tool of oppression. Workers shared stories of being fired by automated systems without human review, of AI-driven schedules that disregarded their health and well-being, and of the constant stress of being watched. The coalition adapts. Faced with these new challenges, the coalition expanded its focus. They drafted an amendment to the National Workers' Bill of Rights addressing automation and climate change. The amendment called for universal retraining programs, federally funded initiatives to help workers adapt to new technologies, climate resilience protections, safety standards, and compensation for workers in climate-affected industries. AI accountability, regulations to ensure transparency and fairness in the use of AI in the workplace. We can't stop progress, Ramon told the coalition. But we can make sure it's progress for everyone, not just the people at the top. Rosa's new role. Rosa Alvarez, still recovering from her PTSD, found new purpose as an advocate for first responders and healthcare workers. She organized a campaign highlighting the mental and physical toll of climate disasters on those tasked with saving lives. We're the first ones in and the last ones out, Rosa said during a press conference. It's time we had protections to match our sacrifices. Her efforts garnered widespread support, including endorsements from environmental groups and labor unions. A universal call. The coalition's new focus resonated with a broader audience. From tech workers worried about AI to farmers displaced by climate change, people from all walks of life joined the movement. Kate's latest article, The Human Cost of Progress, became a rallying cry for the coalition. It ended with a powerful statement: progress should not come at the expense of people. It's time to put humanity back at the center of innovation. The backlash intensifies as the coalition's demands grew, so did the opposition. Corporate lobbyists argued that regulating AI and addressing climate impacts would stifle innovation and hurt the economy. Negative ads accused the coalition of pushing a socialist agenda. But the coalition refused to back down. Let them call us whatever they want, Ramon said at a rally. We're fighting for what's right, and no smear campaign can change that. Chapter 10, The Fight for Federal Standards Introduction. The Halls of Power. The coalition's journey to Congress was both a culmination and a beginning. After months of organizing, protesting, and building alliances, the group had secured a congressional hearing on the National Workers' Bill of Rights and its amendment addressing automation and climate change. It was a monumental step, but the road ahead was fraught with opposition from some of the most powerful interests in the country. This chapter captures the coalition's high-stakes battle in the halls of power, where the fate of workers' rights would be decided. The stakes are set. Elias Vargas and Maria Garcia sat in the visitors' gallery of the House Labor Committee, their hearts pounding as the hearing began. Below them, lawmakers shuffled papers and whispered to aides while corporate lobbyists packed the back rows. "This is it," Maria whispered. "We've got one shot to make them listen." The coalition's proposal was ambitious, calling for a federal minimum standard for workers' compensation benefits, protections against wrongful denials of claims, universal mental health coverage for injured workers, retraining programs for workers displaced by automation, safety and compensation standards for climate-affected industries. It was a comprehensive plan to address systemic inequities, but it faced fierce resistance from corporate lobbyists and conservative lawmakers. The opposition. The hearing opened with testimony from the coalition's opponents, led by executives from major corporations and insurance companies. Their arguments were familiar: economic impact. These reforms will drive up costs for businesses and lead to job losses, one executive warned. State sovereignty. A conservative think tank representative argued, this is an overreach of federal power. States should decide their own labor policies. Fraud concerns. An insurance lobbyist claimed, expanding benefits will only encourage more fraudulent claims. Kate Donovan, sitting in the press section, rolled her eyes as she typed notes. "Same tired excuses," she muttered to herself. But she knew the stakes were high. These arguments had derailed similar efforts in the past. The coalition speaks. The coalition's moment came when Ramon Estrada took the stand. His voice was steady but impassioned as he described the plight of injured workers and the systemic failures they faced. "This isn't about hurting businesses," Ramon said. "It's about protecting the people who make those businesses possible. Without workers, there is no economy." Ramon was followed by Rosa Alvarez, who recounted her struggles with PTSD after her assault in the ER. Her testimony was raw and emotional, leaving many in the room visibly moved. "I gave everything to my job," Rosa said, her voice breaking. "But when I needed help, the system abandoned me. No one should have to go through that." A surprise ally. The coalition's case gained unexpected support when Representative Laura Mills, a moderate Republican, spoke in favor of the bill. Mills, who represented a district with many injured veterans, highlighted the need for universal standards. "Our veterans deserve better," Mills said. "And so do all the workers who keep this country running. This isn't a partisan issue, it's a human issue." Her support was a game changer, breaking through the partisan divide and bringing more lawmakers to the table. Behind the scenes. While the hearing unfolded, Kate and Carlos Alvarez worked behind the scenes to counter the opposition's narratives. Carlos had discovered financial ties between several lawmakers and the insurance lobby, which Kate exposed in a scathing article titled "Bought and Paid For: How Corporations Undermine Workers' Rights in Congress." The article went viral, putting pressure on key lawmakers to distance themselves from corporate donors. A heated exchange. The hearing reached its climax when Maria Garcia took the stand. She directly addressed a senator who had dismissed the bill as unnecessary and costly. "Unnecessary?" Maria said, her voice rising. "Tell that to the workers who've lost their homes, their families, their lives because this system failed them. Tell that to the people you're supposed to represent." The room fell silent. The senator shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Maria held her ground. The vote looms. After hours of testimony, the committee adjourned without a decision. The fate of the bill would come down to a vote scheduled for the following week. The coalition left the hearing feeling both hopeful and anxious. "This isn't over," Elias said as they regrouped outside. "We've made our case, but now we've got to make sure they vote the right way." The final push. The coalition launched a full-scale campaign to secure votes for the bill. They flooded lawmakers' offices with letters, emails, and phone calls from constituents. Social media campaigns went viral, with hashtags like trending nationwide. Kate continued her reporting, exposing the corporations and lobbyists fighting against the bill. Her latest piece, The Cost of Inaction, highlighted the economic and social toll of the current system, making a compelling case for reform. The day of reckoning on the day of the vote, the coalition gathered in the gallery, their hearts pounding as lawmakers debated the bill. The arguments were fierce, with some members passionately defending workers' rights while others warned of economic disaster. When the final votes were tallied, the room erupted in cheers. The National Workers' Bill of Rights had passed the House by a narrow margin. It was a historic moment, but the fight wasn't over. The bill still needed to clear the Senate, where the opposition was even stronger. Chapter 11, The Final Stand Introduction. A nation watching the passage of the National Workers' Bill of Rights in the House was a historic victory, but the coalition knew their fight was far from over. The bill now faced its toughest battle yet, the Senate, where corporate lobbyists held even greater sway and partisan divisions ran deeper. As the coalition prepared for the final showdown, they realized the stakes had never been higher. The nation was watching, and the future of workers' rights hung in the balance. The Senate was deeply divided on the bill. On one side were progressive senators who championed the coalition's cause, arguing that the bill would bring much-needed justice to injured workers and their families. On the other side were conservative senators who decried the bill as an overreach of federal power and a threat to business competitiveness. At the center were a handful of moderates whose votes would decide the bill's fate. The coalition focused its efforts on these undecided senators, organizing rallies and meetings in their home states to pressure them into supporting the bill. Eliot's cross-country journey. Eliot Vargas, who had become a national symbol of the movement, embarked on a cross-country journey to speak directly to these swing senators and their constituents. In Iowa, he attended a town hall with Senator Catherine Blake, a moderate Republican who had expressed concerns about the bill's economic impact. During the town hall, Eliot shared his story with the crowd. "I'm not asking for a handout," he said. "I'm asking for fairness, for a system that doesn't abandon workers like me when we need it most." His words resonated with the audience, many of whom stood up to voice their support for the bill. Senator Blake, visibly moved, promised to review the legislation with an open mind. Maria's new fight. Maria Garcia focused her efforts on California, where Senator James Hollis, a powerful Democrat with deep ties to the insurance industry, had remained noncommittal. Maria organized a protest outside his office, drawing hundreds of workers who had been failed by the current system. "Senator Hollis," Maria said during a speech at the rally, "you claim to fight for working families. Prove it. Stand with us, or show the world whose side you're really on." The protest made headlines, forcing Hollis to meet with Maria and other coalition members. Though he didn't commit to supporting the bill, his office released a statement acknowledging the need for reform. Carlos and the immigrant workers. Carlos Alvarez led a campaign targeting senators in border states, highlighting the exploitation of immigrant workers in industries like agriculture and construction. He organized a caravan of injured immigrant workers who traveled to Washington, D.C., to share their stories. Carlos spoke at a press conference on the Capitol steps. "We're not just workers. We're human beings. And we deserve to be treated that way." His efforts drew attention to the bill's provisions for protecting immigrant workers, building bipartisan support among senators representing states with large immigrant populations. The lobbyists' last stand. As the coalition gained momentum, corporate lobbyists ramped up their efforts to kill the bill. They flooded senators' offices with calls and emails, warning of economic disaster if the legislation passed. Negative ads aired across the country, accusing the coalition of pushing a radical agenda that would harm small businesses. Kate Donovan countered with a series of exposés revealing the lobbyists' tactics and financial ties to key senators. Her article, "The Billion-Dollar Smear Campaign Against Workers' Rights," went viral, putting public pressure on lawmakers to distance themselves from corporate interests. Rosa's emotional testimony. The coalition's fight reached a turning point when Rosa Alvarez testified before the Senate Labor Committee. Her story of battling PTSD after her workplace assault moved even the bill's staunchest opponents. "I didn't ask to be injured," Rosa said, her voice trembling. "I didn't ask to lose my sense of safety or my ability to work. All I'm asking is for a system that helps me heal instead of making me feel like I don't matter." Her testimony was broadcast live, drawing millions of viewers. Social media erupted with support, with hashtags like trending nationwide. The Senate floor the day of the Senate vote arrived. The chamber was packed with lawmakers, reporters, and members of the coalition. As the debate unfolded, emotions ran high. Senators on both sides made impassioned speeches, reflecting the deep divisions over the bill. Ramon Estrada watched from the gallery, flanked by Elliot, Maria, Carlos, and Rosa. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "we've already changed the conversation." The vote, when the roll call began, the tension in the room was palpable. Each yeah or nay brought the coalition closer to a decision. As the final votes were tallied, the Senate clerk announced the result on this vote. The yeas are 52 and the nays are 48. The bill is passed. The gallery erupted in cheers. Elliot hugged Maria, tears streaming down his face. Rosa held Carlos's hand as they celebrated the culmination of their fight. Ramon stood silently, his eyes fixed on the senators below, a mix of relief and determination on his face. A new beginning. The passage of the National Workers' Bill of Rights marked a historic victory, but the coalition knew their work wasn't over. Implementation would require vigilance, and corporate interests would undoubtedly seek to undermine the new standards. In the weeks that followed, the coalition transitioned from advocacy to oversight, ensuring the bill's provisions were enforced. They also began laying the groundwork for future battles, from universal healthcare to comprehensive immigration reform. Epilogue: A Nation Transformed. The final pages of the book reflect on the coalition's journey and its impact on the nation. Injured workers across America began receiving the benefits and protections they deserved. The coalition story inspired similar movements in other industries and even other countries. In a closing scene, Elliot, Maria, Carlos, Rosa, and Ramon gather at a community center in Millridge, Ohio, to celebrate their victory. As they look around at the faces of workers and families they've helped, Ramon raises a glass to justice, to dignity, and to every worker who will never have to fight this fight alone. Dedication to my wife and kids, whose love and support make all things possible. By Elias Harper.